Time to start.
All right, we are at 9 a.m. So I would now like to call to order the July 14th, 2021 meeting of the Indiana State Board of Education. Roll call, please.
Ms. DeLosa.
Present.
Mr. Durham.
Present.
Dr. Ernest. Present. Dr. Freitas.
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Gastineau.
Present.
Mr. Mapes.
Here.
Mr. Miller. Ms. Moat.
Here.
Ms. Renschler.
Here.
Mr. Watts.
Here.
And Dr. Jenner.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Great. Let's please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from the June 2nd, 2021 meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, quick statement. Little bit of congratulations to start with. Byron and Greg, y'all don't know what I'm going to say. This I can tell by your face. Byron, Greg, and William were reappointed to the State Board of Ed. So we're thrilled to have them back. We have a lot of good work and opportunity ahead, and just really pleased to have the three of you back on the board. So thank you. Then the second thing, just a quick shout out. One of our board members, this is another William Durham shout out, was recently named Executive Director of 100 Black Men of Indianapolis. I know you've served in education for years and years. You've impacted so many students, and you're about to impact so many more students with guiding in your mentorship. And so proud of you, and again, thank you for your leadership.
Thank you.
So schools saw several different school leaders or contributors to getting school going out today, walking in. We're gearing back up. Many of our administrators are back in, making sure everything is ready to go. Counselors as well, making sure everything's ready to go. Pat, I believe we found out last year during COVID that, Pat, you're one of the first schools in the state to start.
Yep.
You start end of July.
12 days.
12 days. 12 days and counting. Every time I talk to Pat, he has a countdown, which is how it goes right now for school leaders. We're on the mission to set our schools up for success, and now is the time we gear back up. As you well know, the vast majority of Indiana schools will begin in August, so the next time we meet, we will be pretty much in full swing as a state. And again, we're anticipating in Indiana that we will be in full force, 5 days a week, in person, and that's been a common question that we've had, and anecdotally, we all hear different things, but we actually have our official instructional modality data for the state of Indiana from last school year. As you know, we depended during COVID on self-reported data from our schools. We were awaiting really the actual data that just came in, and Dr. Flores will mention that later on in her presentation, and then we'll have further analyzation of that data. But what we saw again is the majority of Indiana schools were open for 90% of the school year. Just really proud of our educators in Indiana. Today is a big day. Today we will release several sets of data. iStep Plus and iLearn results. Again, instructional modality data, which means in-person, hybrid, or virtual. COVID-19 academic impact analysis. That COVID-19 academic impact analysis will be presented by Dr. Flores from the department, but that is really a complete data analysis that was done by the National Center for Assessment, who partnered in reviewing multiple data points that we sent their way to really get a sense of where we are in Indiana in order to drive us forward. And so Dr. Damian Bettebenter, who's a senior associate for the National Center for Assessment, is here with us. I think he flew down from Boston. I randomly ran into him last night at a restaurant in Indianapolis. What are the chances? He met me when I was in my sweats and flip-flops. But seriously, Dr. Bettebenter, we are so glad to have you here, are eager to hear your expertise as well. And on that note, and I know Dr. Flores will mention this, in Indiana, we were so pleased, again, to submit as much data as possible to really understand where we are. So we submitted, ISTEP, iLearn, WIDA. We also submitted formative assessment data. For the first time ever, we have access to formative assessment data in Indiana. We specifically submitted NWEA because that's what we had available. Of course, going forward, we will have other formative assessment data. But looking forward to hearing more about that. Following, we'll also talk about Indiana's response to the COVID-19 academic data, which again includes local response is necessary, state level response is necessary, and then we in education can't do it alone. So it's also going to be a community effort that we're encouraging, and I know that partnerships are already happening there. On that note, I will pause before we do the discussion items on assessment. I'll do a little bit of additional level setting, but I'll pause right now and shift over to if there are any board member comments and reports. Yes.
Just because I had some questions ahead of time, and Pat, I actually told you wrong. I had to look to check myself. The NASB annual conference is October 7th and 8th. That's a Thursday and Friday. That is virtual again this year. So we were able to, any of you that deal with budgets know that becomes a deal when you're worried whether people will show up, won't show up, and where we really are. So the hotel and conference center gave us the option to push it one more year out, which that cost us nothing. So we went virtual. And what we actually found last year, so I'd give a plug, we actually found our attendance was much higher virtually, which doesn't surprise anybody, but our engagement levels as well with the site that we use for that and what have you. So I would just encourage you all to do that or take part in that. And then our monthly office hours, I'd put a plug in for that, have always been good and timely as well. So those are two things that I would throw in just because I was getting some questions about that.
Fantastic. And the 7th and 8th of which month?
October.
Of October.
Yeah.
And some know, some don't know, Byron serves as the national chairperson of the School Board Association. So really, again, appreciate your leadership there. That allows us to keep ourselves posted with the best information in a quick way. So appreciate those updates. Anyone else have board member comments or reports? Everyone is looking at their phone or writing or avoiding eye contact. So I'm taking that as a no. Let's move on to public comment.
We do not have public comment.
Seeing none, we will move forward to the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? We have a motion and second. Roll call, please.
Approval of the consent agenda. Ms. DeLosa?
Yes.
Mr. Graham?
Yes.
Dr. Ernest?
Aye.
Dr. Freitas?
Yes.
Mr. Gastineau?
Yes.
Mr. Mapes?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Moat?
Yes.
Ms. Rentschler?
Yes.
Mr. Watts?
Yes.
Dr. Jenner?
Yes.
Consent agenda is approved, and Mr. Miller, I have added you to the roll.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. So let's move to new business. First new business item is school accreditation, International Soccer Academy of America.
So International Soccer Academy of America has submitted its petition for immediate accreditation from the State Board of Education, asking to be accredited for the upcoming school year. It submitted the information required of it pursuant to the board's processes that were adopted earlier this year. After reviewing the material provided by the International Soccer Academy of America, as well as subsequent submissions returned to the department's ultimate recommendation is to deny their request for immediate accreditation. I'm happy to answer any questions from a procedural standpoint, but Mr. Hunt, the leader of the school, is here and would also like to address the board. So, yeah, please.
Chad, could you, and I appreciate all the information that you've given and what they gave as well, and have gone through that, and I'll probably have some questions for him. But could you very briefly just bullet the things that keep us from getting there? Because I guess I'd love to get there,
Sure.
But what are the things that keep us from getting there? Can you bullet that?
Happy to. So the biggest issue identified by the department dealt with curriculum and the school's ability to sufficiently demonstrate that it had curriculum aligned not only to Indiana's academic standards, but curriculum that was sufficient to afford all students that attended the school the opportunity to earn an Indiana diploma, which is a requirement for state accreditation. At the end of the day, it's a high school, so ultimately, once accreditation is conferred, that entity is able to issue Indiana diplomas to students who complete the educational programming offered by the school. So that, I think, is the number one and probably largest issue there. Other issues dealt with assessments and their use of formative benchmark assessments. At the time, there were issues related to the budget and some of the tuition questions that were left outstanding. The Soccer Academy did provide supplemental information, which I believe board members have, related to some of its course offerings as well as its tuition. So that, as far as having a set tuition amount, that's no longer an issue. And then the final sort of issue identified by the department dealt with instructional methods and, again, opportunities to earn earn an Indiana diploma and complete the requirements that a student must complete to actually earn that diploma. If you'd like more detail, I know a member of the Office of Accountability is here to speak directly to the submission of the material, but that's at a very high level what the issues were.
Thank you. That was what I wanted. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
And I apologize for not giving that in advance.
Yeah, are there any other questions for Chad? All right, let's invite Mr. Hunt to come forward.
Good morning.
Good morning.
If I could just give a little speech, and then I'll just answer some questions and yield, if I could, at the end to one of my staff members. I don't know if you can hear me. I'm a little tall for this. Distinguished members of the board, my name is Ethan Hunt. I am the founder and executive director of the International Soccer Academy of America. We are located at 205 West Edison Road in Mishawaka, Indiana. We are a senior high school, grades 9 through 12. We are the first high school in the United States that is specifically centered around an educational experience for high school soccer players. So that is our main focus. We don't bring in basketball players, we don't bring in football players. We're specifically for soccer players. Soccer academies around the world, that's exactly what a soccer academy is a school that's just for soccer players. So this is something that's extremely common in Europe, South America, and Mexico, but doesn't actually exist in the United States yet, where the kids go to school and play soccer on that same team and just focus on school. This helps build chemistry, camaraderie, and familiarity with peers, teachers, and coaches, and it also helps students get more individual time with their teachers. At ISAA, our student-to-teacher ratio this year will be 5-to-1. A quick introduction of myself. I was born and raised in Mishawaka, Indiana, to a 15-year-old mother and an 18-year-old father. I've lived in Mishawaka my entire life, and I'm not sure how many of you have been involved in it, but I'd like to say I was the first class of students to go through high school on the Indiana Choice Scholarship Voucher Program, and I'm forever grateful for that. So there's young adults that are in the workforce now that came up through that scholarship program. And I couldn't have gone to a top high school if it wasn't for Indiana's passing that law. And I'm very, very grateful for that. With that being said, the Indiana Choice Voucher Program really saved my life. Without getting into too much detail, really saved my life. The Choice Scholarship Program provides mental, emotional, and relational advantages for students while giving them superior academics. I went on to attend Bethel University, which is in Mishawaka, where I graduated cum laude, underclassman president 2015-16, servant leader of the year, kinesiology student of the year in 2017-18, and Bethel University servant leader of the year in 2018-19. I also have my national coaching diploma from United Soccer Coaches. I'm one of the youngest in the country to have that, as well as diplomas in soccer management and scouting and soccer analytics from Sport Management Worldwide. I also received my master's degree from the Autonomous University of Barcelona at 23 and was the youngest American to ever graduate with a master's degree from Spain. I'd like to introduce my staff to you, first with Mr. Kerry Davis. Mr. Davis, would you raise your hand, and I'll bring you up in a second. Mr. Davis has his bachelor's in mathematics from Purdue University and his master's in education from Indiana University. Mr. Davis taught mathematics for the last 10 years at Marion High School in Mishawaka, Indiana. In his career, he's taught Math 7 and 8, Algebra 1 and 2, Geometry, Trigonometry, Pre-Calculus, and Calculus A and B, among others. He's also taught mathematics at Crenshaw Preparatory School and at Lake Highland Preparatory School in Orlando, Florida, among others. He's won 4 prestigious awards, including the Lake Highland Prep Crystal Apple Award, the Teacher of the Year at Crenshaw Preparatory School, Light of Learning Award at Marion High School, and the Excellence in Teaching Award at Marion High School. And Carrie has an active Indiana teaching license. Next is Ms. Cheryl Maston, who couldn't be here today. She's flying home from Hawaii, so we're all a little bit jealous. She has her BS in Business Administration from Indiana University South Bend. She also has her elementary education certificate in language arts middle school endorsement from Indiana University South Bend, as well as her language arts 5 through 12 certification. She's taught English for the last 14 years at Marion High School in Mishawaka, Indiana. And at Marion, she taught freshman English, which includes reading comprehension, writing skills, public speaking skills, vocabulary, grammar, and pre-SAT practice. She also created dynamic and diverse units to maximize student interest and skill development while teaching basic, regular, and honors level courses. She's regularly attended disciplinary hearings and was the department chair for 2 years. She's also taught new teachers that are new to the profession. And prior to teaching at Marion, she taught at South Bend St. Joseph High School for 3 years and has spent 7 years before this at North American Science and Business Administration and has been on the board of Prevent Child Abuse St. Joseph County, as well as Prevent Rape and Domestic Abuse Crisis Center advocate for 6 years and Hope Rescue Mission volunteer for 7 years. Mr. Rob Carrasco. Mr. Carrasco has his bachelor's in political science. These were actually my teachers in high school, so I'm still required to call them Mr. and Mrs. They don't like that, but I can't help it. He has his bachelor's in political science from Indiana University, Bloomington, and his MBA in finance from Ashford University's Forbes School of Business. From 2012 to 2013, he worked in business, serving as a manager of CVS Health in Rhode Island and a financial analyst and manager for Unique Tooling in North Liberty, Indiana. For the last 8 years, Rob's taught business, finance, marketing, web design, digital citizenship, computer applications, among others, at Marion High School. Rob also served as business education department chair. Rob is head cross-country coach at Indiana University South Bend and is actively involved in his student-athletes' success, and Rob has an active Indiana teaching license. Cheryl also has an active Indiana teaching license. I don't know if I mentioned that. Next is Ms. Sandra Ponce de Leon. Ms. Ponce de Leon was a graphic communications major at Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana in Mexico City, Mexico. She also has various continuing classes in teaching in Elkhart and South Bend, Indiana. Sandra has 20 years of experience as a Spanish teacher, and the most recent of those serving in Montessori system. She also speaks and has lived in both English and Spanish-speaking countries. She also speaks both English and Spanish. Sandra taught 2 years at Elkhart Montessori School in Elkhart, Indiana, Spanish for 8 years at Cornerstone Christian Montessori School in Elkhart, Indiana, and Spanish and art for 8 years at Granger Christian School in Granger, Indiana. And we'd be more than willing to get Sandra an Indiana teaching license if that is required. Last but not least, I'd like to introduce Kate Ludick. Ms. Ludick has her bachelor's in English from Cleveland State University in Cleveland, Ohio, her Association Montessori International AMI teaching diploma for ages 6 through 12, as well as ages 12 through 18. Kate also has her State of Ohio non-tax teaching license for ages 6 to 12 and her Ohio non-tax teaching license for ages 6 to 18. I said 6 to 18, 6 to 12. Kate has her Orton Gillingham Multisensory Academy for Literacy Certificate and will complete her AMI Montessori Sports Certificate soon. She's taught at 5 Montessori schools and academies around the world, including Hershey Montessori Farm School in Ohio, Montessori Bali in Bali, Indonesia, Montessori Mallorca in Mallorca, Spain, Virgin Islands Montessori School in Peter Gruber International Academy in St. Thomas, Virgin Islands, and most recently at Montessori Academy, Edison Lakes in Mishawaka, Indiana. And we can pursue Indiana teaching license for Kate if that is necessary. I'd just like to briefly talk about the school and then open it up for questions. My master's thesis was actually the plan behind this whole project. When I was doing that in Barcelona, it was a 100-page business plan for how this school would work. And a school for soccer players, both girls and boys, to prepare them for playing professionally, collegiately, or if they just want to do a career, and maybe soccer is what keeps them in school from dropping out. If we can keep them in school, then we can give them a future. So I know how important it is for students to receive that one-on-one attention to prosper. The science backs it up, and so too does my experience, which is why I hired 3 teachers that I had in school to come in that spent the most time with me individually, because I know they'll do the same for everybody else. All those folks said yes about coming on board, and that's a really big step for folks who have a perfectly fine job in health insurance to come and go to a startup. It said a lot about the project, it said a lot about their trust in me, and I want to repay that trust to them. So as of today, we have 22 students enrolled at ISAA, which we're fairly happy with for our first year, without any, accreditation or financial support from anyone except just myself at the moment. So we expect that number to triple or quadruple with our international students coming in next year. With COVID, we weren't able to get those students to come in this year, hopefully next year. And that accreditation process is extremely important for us. The other important factor, as I mentioned, is the school choice voucher program. This has to do with the fact that 100% of our students receive financial aid directly from ISAA and ISAA's donors, a nonprofit. 92% of our students, 92%, are ethnic minorities. 30% of our students are at or below the poverty line. We're making a change in the lives of young people, and we hope that you can support this mission as well. I just want to address a couple of the things that the department had mentioned, and then in regard to the assessment that ISA will develop its own curriculum, is not entirely accurate. When I was hiring my staff, I had to fill out the application because we have a deadline to file the application, and I said, we'll meet all Core 40 requirements, no problem. I graduated with that diploma. All the teachers have taught that diploma, but I didn't want to go in there and say, here's what we're going to teach, when the teachers were going to come in and say, actually, no, I'm going to use this curriculum. When we submitted the materials, this teaching staff wasn't hired yet, so it's just coming from me, who's not an education expert. They're the experts. And so I wanted them to be able to submit their curriculum to you. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough time to really get all the curriculum out there. So we would love to address that if necessary, and we would have no problem doing that. And then ISAA has also been in touch with Indiana Online and Ivy Tech regarding the partnerships for those programs to offer anything that we can't offer at the school. So I've already spoken to the 2 individuals with Ivy Tech and Indiana Online, and they're ready to move forward within the week if we get approved. Lastly, mentioned in your binders, I just want to address it, but I believe he already said, we added the tuition there at $24,900. The reason I had a hard time submitting that originally is because nobody pays that, but we actually have, our payment system is based off family income. So this enables kids who would have no opportunity of going to our school to come. The lowest we go is $3,000, and that's a lot of money for a family who makes $30,000 a year to spend on that instead of food or groceries or gas money. And so 100% of students receive financial aid, and this year the minimum we've given out is 60% to every student, but it really goes up to 90% in terms of how many scholarships we get. Financial aid is based solely off family income, and I would love to answer your questions and yield to my staff if there are any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt, for your presentation. Board members, do you have any questions? Yes, William.
Awesome presentation. I have a question about the vision You state in kind of the last phrase of that you're focusing upon the goal of changing the way soccer is generally played in the United States. Can you just give me a little bit more insight on what you mean by that?
Absolutely. So that was something that was put on the website about a year ago, and they asked for our vision, and I copy and pasted off the website because that's what we had on the website. But really what that focuses on is an academy system. So that means that kids aren't going and playing 2 or 3 practices a week for a club team and paying out the you-know-what to try and actually get to become a better soccer player. It's actually them being educated in that same system. So they come and they play for us and they learn in school. And so when I say the way that soccer is played, well, the way that soccer is viewed, and it can be viewed as not just for the rich, it can be for everybody. And so that's what our goal is.
Thank you.
Mr. Hunt, just a point of clarification. Did you operate last school year?
No.
Okay, so then that's some of the question that I had in my mind. So then when you speak about of the 22 students enrolled, that would be enrolled for this coming school year. And then when you talk about the financial plan and the percentage on scholarship, that would be for the coming year.
Correct.
So, okay, and I'm business minded as well, so I have a lot of business questions in addition to the pedagogy side, right? So let me pause there and I think process a bit, but I want to open it up again to other board members. Yeah.
So regardless of the decision we make today, you will operate with the 22 students you have for sure?
We will try our best.
Okay. So do you or do you not have scholarships in place for those 22? That's where I think we're still having trouble. So when you say 100% or 60% or more, is that today you have 60% or more?
Those are unfunded discounts. That is us taking it off the bottom line and hoping that next year we grow and grow and grow. But, we could be in the hole big time if we don't get sponsors, if we don't get approved.
Okay. Which is,
and I'm talking about,
I think what's disconcerting to us at this
Sure.
point, right?
Right.
And I want to be clear, I love this. Don't understand soccer. I have 2 nieces who are being recruited by schools. I still can't get my mind around it at all. But I totally love this concept, right? So I want to be clear about that to start with. But to me, so then I just have one more question, which is yes or no for me. Do you have already created, since we're in July and got schools 12 days from starting, and I don't know when you were going to start, but irrelevant. Yes or no, do you now have a full-on Algebra 1, I'm just going to use Algebra 1 as the answer or the question, Algebra 1 curriculum that is aligned to Indiana standards?
yes, and he'll be coming up to speak.
Okay. Those were my questions, sorry.
I have one more.
Yes.
With the goal of having no more than 150 students ultimately, correct?
Correct.
When you were going over your instructional staff, I did not hear any special education.
Right.
So do you anticipate having a special needs population there at the school, and how will that population be serviced?
Yes, so Penn High School is the high school in our district that we'll be reaching out to see if they'll be able to send someone over from their school, since we're private and we can't, fund another salary, to see if they would be able to send over. Otherwise, and I've spoken with Kate Ludick and other folks on our staff that are very close to getting there with certain educational pieces. If we needed to do that, that would be no problem. But we were hoping that, I believe from our research, said that a public school could send somebody over to a private school, a person that maybe specializes in that, if they're within that district, and that's whose district that we're within is a private school.
I've got a quick question. So, I'm pretty familiar with IMG Academy,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I coach. football and
For
lacrosse.
those of us who are not familiar, what is that, Mr. Gastineau?
It's sort of like a much larger version of what he's talking about. It is a private school in Florida where you go to be an athlete.
Is it for lacrosse only?
Everything.
It's for everything,
You
okay?
name it, you go there. If you're an
I will
elite
Google
athlete.
that later.
Yes.
Okay.
And obviously with lacrosse, I understand how important it is to travel. Like we travel out east all the time for exposure. So I guess my question, if I'm in the Penn, Mishawaka area, what's a month like? Is this going to be like I go to class for a couple days and then we take off, like let's say Culver hockey, right? They take off and they travel to Canada and the East Coast to play, and then they come back to support those kids that latitude of missing classes and one-on-one time. I mean, what's the selling point here?
No, we don't miss class time. One of the most important factors is we never go virtual. We don't go online because we know the kids need that in-person time. So we're the only high school that has colleges on the schedule. So to minimize the amount of class time that's missed, we're playing 10 colleges within the state of Indiana this year for our soccer matches, which allows us to not have to go play high school teams in Illinois to get a good game. We play college teams. We're the only high school in the country that actually plays college teams as our schedule. So Huntington, Indiana Wesleyan, all those schools, we actually play them. So that allows our students to play them on the weekends and
You
then
will
come
play
back.
them.
Correct.
You don't play them now?
Well, in a week, we do. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt you.
No
I just
problem.
was still trying to
Sure.
make sure.
Sure.
Mr. Gastineau, did that answer your question? Mr. Mapes, I saw your hand.
And just to, IMG was in my thesis. It was about 20 pages about IMG, so.
So have you gotten sponsors or fundraising done for a baseline budget to start this program?
Yeah, so our budget's $350 for this year, $350,000, and we've already raised $100,000 in tuition dollars, and then we have big fundraisers coming up with really big donors. We actually are partnered with Villarreal in Spain, which is in La Liga. That's the league Messi plays in. For anybody who doesn't know much about soccer, it's the best, one of the best leagues in the world. They allowed us to put advertisements on our jerseys, which actually are Villarreal jerseys. We're the only team in the region that's partnered with a professional team in Europe. We don't like to focus on that in a meeting like this because this is about the educational aspect. But with that being said, the soccer aspect is what's going to bring in a lot of money. So we have someone who wants to put their name on our jerseys. And being on a Villarreal jersey is big bucks. So we're talking about $100,000, $150,000.
Then did you look to partner with any local school district?
Well, the schools right now think that we're specifically maybe trying to take their players. So obviously you have that little bit of backlash. But surprisingly, every single coach that I've talked to has been pretty supportive of me individually, of what we're trying to do. But we just try and encourage them to know that we're just like a Marion or a St. Joe. It's just a private school, but we just focus on soccer. So we don't expect anything too crazy from that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Moe.
So Ethan, in this COVID, post-COVID, depends on how you feel about where we are, environment, can you share how you will support students in the event that we have hybrid learning again, in the event that, there is lockdown? I mean, can you tell me more about that, especially with the virtual
Sure.
learning and technology capabilities?
Hopefully it doesn't have to happen, and that's why we have the 5-to-1 ratio where they can get that one-on-one time. If it does happen and we have to go virtually, then we'll just buy all the technology that we need for those students to have those things. We've got about 70% of our students who have access to a laptop at home right now, so we would need to buy probably 6 or 7 laptops for students that don't have access. They all have internet access, they just don't have a personal computer. They share it with mom and dad. Mom and dad needs it for work, whatever. So it would be no problem to get 6 or 7 Chromebooks, but that is also something we're in the application process for with Microsoft and all those kinds of things, asking them if they will, help us with technology. The situation is, until you're accredited, you're almost impossible to get any kind of grant from anybody. So you kind of have your hands tied to even do what you need to do with any of those companies. But so we would just pay out of pocket for those like we've done for everything else. We've out of pocket about $200,000 right now for our 35,000 foot facility. So that gives you an idea of where we're at. So.
Beyond the technology, what's your thinking about the virtual learning or blended learning experience for the students?
It depends if we have to go back. to COVID situation or not. If we have to and we don't have a choice, then we have to do that. We would not like to do that if we don't have to, but we will make it happen if that's what has to be done and that's what is the law at that moment. We would do that. But if it's not a requirement, but something just below a requirement, we would still prefer to be in person.
Okay.
And by the way, those line of questions were not leading or signaling in any way to Indiana schools. They are just preparing for what
Absolutely.
might be, which is what every school in our country had to go through this year. So just a point of clarification.
We have no problem
Good question.
providing the technology for the students for free.
I also had a question. Having been a Division I track and field athlete myself, and going from high school to college, you see that the quality of athlete significantly improves. What if a student gets to your school and realizes they're not to the caliber of some of the other students you have, and they really don't get playing time? What if they decide to quit soccer? What are their options?
So they have a couple different options. The first is what I did. I played soccer in high school, but I didn't want to be a professional player, but I wanted to be in the management of sport. So what I did was I managed the soccer team. So they'd have that opportunity to stay in the school and learn more about business of sport in general. That's kind of the natural path. If they say, I just hate all of it and I want to go somewhere else, then they can go somewhere else. And we just tell the kids it's just a one-year commitment. And even at semester, if you want to leave and you want to go somewhere else, no problem. There's no commitment, like a 4-year commitment or anything like that. And yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Are there any additional questions?
Can
Yes.
once again, and I just want to say that, one, regardless of, we could be talking lacrosse, we could be talking softball, we could be talking a plant geneticist school, right? And clearly everybody in this room knows I'm about as big a school choice advocate as there is. So again, I want you to be successful, right? But as a person who has to vote here, the things for me that I still, you have a lot of what ifs, and you're going to in the phase that you are, right? So I don't want, that's the thing that becomes the challenge of innovating, right? Are those gaps. But you've still got some things like special ed that we talk about and some other pieces for me. I want you to do this, but I also want you to come back to us next year with all of these things, which I think you're in the process of answering, but a lot of your answers we're not just there yet, right? And I think I'm seeing heads nodding. So I just wanted to say that because I don't want you to leave here thinking they think this is a crappy idea, because I don't. I can't speak for everybody else. I think it's a great idea. Wish we had more of it. Wish that would be the direction we could go in school, totally. So, but we need to have these things, because I've lived a little bit of the world you are, where you're trying to get curriculum, aligned to state standards and those kinds of things. So I think that, to me, those three areas, I just wanted to make that point, at least on behalf of myself, that's where I'm good. I feel like I'm in the Shark Tank and I'm saying I'm out, but I want you to understand that piece of that, right? I think we would all probably nod our heads if we had all those answers in place of, yep, this is how we do, and I've got this partnership over here, and we've got that. That's what we're needing, right? So I wanted you to not leave, and I'm sure that's what staff has said as well. I know them well enough to know that that's what they've said. Sure. But that's where I am at this point.
Dr. Ernst, thank you for your comments. Ms. DeLosa, did you have another comment?
I was just going to support what Mr. Ernest said. Dr. Ernest, especially when it comes to students with special needs, they really don't have that much time for you to figure it out. It really needs to be in place, and it needs to be a strong system to make sure that they're supported properly, because typically they've lost time already, and they're typically behind already. And honestly, any type of athlete can have special needs, and we don't want them to be shunned from any place because they have special needs, because that tends to happen as well, because it's inconvenient. So I'd like to see the school operating with strength and everything before you begin to take this down.
Ms. Delosa, thank you for your comments. Mr. Miller?
You said you had about 22 students signed up
Yes.
already. What are the ages? Do you have any?
14 through 18.
Okay, so you do have some would-be seniors in that
Correct.
22. About how many?
2.
Thank you.
Mr. Hunt, I am so appreciative of your servant leadership and your passion. I was not a D1 athlete, no surprise to anyone in this room, but I did play soccer. Shocking, yes, but fun fact, I love soccer. Our role as a board is to really, we are here to support schools in every way. But the big questions you heard today, the fiscal responsibility is essential. You have to be fiscally responsible with Indiana taxpayer dollars.
Right.
And then the other massive one you heard today, which you're going to hear more of, is the academics. I mean, we are here to make sure our students in Indiana have the foundation, the academic foundation necessary to maximize their trajectory for life. I think you probably have some fantastic teachers who signed up with you. And by the way, it's very cool that they were also your teachers. That, again, speaks so much for you and your relationships. I am also at the place where I'd like to see more. If you do move forward to operate, you're welcome to come back and present the data, present the progress, and you can hear, while we want you to be successful on the soccer side, we really, really need you to be successful fiscally, and the biggest is, well, they're both big, but academically for kids, including special education students. So that's very honestly where I am, but I do sincerely appreciate your passion and that you wrote a 100-page master's level dissertation, which is impressive. Any other comments, thoughts, and then we'll ask for a motion.
I have a procedural question.
Yes.
Is it an option for Mr. Hunt to withdraw his request for accreditation rather than receive a denial?
Yeah, Mr. Murphy.
So that is an option. If the board were to deny or the application were withdrawn, then Mr. Hunt could operate for a year, and that was actually a fairly standard process. Some schools get granted immediate accreditation, others will operate for a year and come back and show, a little bit more assurance there. So yes, both are an option. I don't think the board's denial is necessarily saying we're not. I don't think that there's a connotation, negative connotation there with the denial. All that's saying is, we want to see a little bit more information after 1 year of operation.
I appreciate you giving that clarification, just because I would think were I at the podium, I would want to know is it better for me to withdraw it, or is the denial, having that strategic choice? So.
Would I be able to have just one staff member come up and speak, just so you could,
Yes,
and
you can.
a parent as well? If that's
You can
okay?
have a staff member and a parent. We're getting close to ready to vote, so why
Sure.
don't you come on up?
Thank you.
Hello.
I'm Kate Ludick. I've been living in Indiana the past 2 years. So I moved here from, I've been teaching internationally, but from the Virgin Islands, where we had a couple hurricanes there, and so I was teaching there and moved here. So what I hear is, and I wanted to just specifically address the things that you were addressing. The special education, which is very, very important. And also, and the fiscal, or the finances, I'm not a specialist in, but I know for me, so Montessori education is very well known for inclusivity, so being inclusive of special needs students. And I myself, I have taught I have 2 trainings in that, international diplomas. Each were a year long, and how special needs are handled in that situation. We meet each student where they are, yes. I also have training, it's called All Kinds of Minds, Schools Attuned, and it's multi-intelligence training. So how, with special needs, with being an inclusive environment, which is every environment that I've taught in has been that. Teachers, I specifically have the training to note when special education may be needed or continuing that, and how to get those special needs met in an inclusive way, but also meeting the needs of each student. So I just wanted to let you know, and especially with Montessori, part of my degree and master's degree, which I need to take a summer of that, it's automatically special education because it's so hands-on. So I've spoken to Ethan about that, and the other teachers as well, just how that is to be addressed. And the way I see it now, and coming from the Virgin Islands where we had this traumatic natural disaster, COVID is it's a disaster as well. So I see every one of those students as special needs. And on top of that, the trauma from COVID, and it is trauma, and I've seen it, and I've been working in South Bend community in basketball, and reaching out to students who, haven't been in school and who weren't doing the online. So I have experience with that and how to support. But I want to say I'm also a yoga teacher. I have my registered yoga teacher license from Cleveland Clinic. And I've also had training in how to deal with trauma as well as experience. So as far as the special needs, right now it's a matter of, I've worked with special needs students my whole life on elementary level, high school level, and I feel that I am adept and able to be kind of in charge of that component. And I know that with Montessori training and education as a Montessori teacher, and I also have traditional experience as well, that I am able to address those individual students and the body as a whole. But I just really wanted to point that out.
Thank you, Miss. It's Ludick, right? Ludick. Yes. Thank you, Miss Ludick, and appreciate your thoughts. Does anyone have questions for Miss Ludick? And by the way, welcome to Indiana. We're glad you're here.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Hunt, any other? And then we will be calling for the vote, so this will be the last person.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Tracy White, and I believe that ISAA is going to be a huge asset in our community. My son Preston will be attending this fall, and I hear all of your concerns because they were my concerns as well. I was worried. He's a junior in high school. He will be starting this coming school year. He's also a special education student. He has an IEP with a traditional school. And so it was not a decision that we made lightly when we made the decision to change his schools in his upcoming junior year. My daughter is a public school teacher, and her in-laws are public school teachers, and I've had lots of conversations with them trying to decide what we were going to do in the best interest of Preston. And we weighed the pros and we weighed the cons, and we just really felt that this was an opportunity that we couldn't pass up for him. Preston was diagnosed with autism when he was about 6 years old. School is difficult for him. Can he get through it? Yes. Math is extremely, extremely hard, and he works hard every single day to earn the grades that he gets. And so when most parents are like cheering, yeah, you got an A, I'm like, yeah, you got a D+, that's great. You know, in math, his other grades are fine. But math is an absolute struggle for him. And so when we met with Ethan and met with the teachers and listened to them on family night, you know, I just came to realize that the style of teaching that they've discussed with us is something that's really going to benefit Preston, because he is a hands-on person. If he can do it and feel it, he can learn it, and it just made sense for us to take that leap of faith. It's not like he goes to you know, I'm not sure what the term would be. He goes to Northridge High School in Middlebury. I will be withdrawing him from there to go here, but that's where he attended. So it's a top-notch school in Indiana. But there have been instances over his academic career at Northridge that would blow your mind. At one point, I even reached out to the Indiana Disability Rights because his IEP doesn't get followed, it's been a struggle that I've had to fight every single year. From about 6th grade on, middle or elementary school, intermediate school, teachers seem to kind of go probably way above and beyond what they would be required to. But when we hit 6th grade, the whole trajectory changed, and it has been a struggle ever since. So looking at the student-to-teacher ratio, this year it's low, so it's 5-to-1. He's going to get the instruction that he needs to be successful. He's not going to be pushed off because the para has 14 other students that she has to take care of and assist and doesn't have time to help him. Not for how this sounds, but spending 4 hours at night doing math homework, you know, where he's having a meltdown and I'm like, it's not even worth it to continue. So I know you can't deny that the school is for athletics, it's for soccer students, but soccer is a motivator for him. So if anything gets tied, and other students, I mean, I would imagine, you know, if you can find a student's motivation, you're going to be able to reach them and help them learn. So when the opportunity arose, we decided to jump on it, because I can see him coming to me and being like, I'm not going to school anymore. This is too difficult. It's just not what I want to do. So I can, you know, see that being something. He turns 18 and he's like, I'm out. Where this will keep him on a pathway. It'll motivate him to be successful. It's a small, inclusive environment, and he's not going to get lost in the sea of 300, 400, 800, 600, you know, students. So I absolutely understand your concerns, and so.
And we appreciate your perspective as a parent.
Yeah,
thank you for your courage to come up here and talk to us. Really appreciate it. We want schools across Indiana to be as successful as possible. We want parents to have the greatest options for quality choices for their children. It really deeply matters to us too. So appreciate hearing your passion. At this time, we're going to go ahead and call for a vote.
Okay.
Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Do we have a motion for the school accreditation of the International Soccer Academy of America?
Katie, if I could, I'm going to make a comment and I will lead into a motion.
Okay.
I would like to echo what my good friend to the left here said. I do hope that we see you back, because I feel like there are a lot of things that you are almost there with. But you're not there for me. You are close, and there are lots. If I had a checklist, I think there'd be a lot of TBDs that that you may have 12 months from now. But I don't feel like they're there yet. So with that, I'll make a motion to approve staff recommendation.
And as a point
Which
of...
would be, I'm sorry, go on.
So the motion is to approve staff recommendation.
Which would be a denial.
Which
of
is
the
a denial of the school accreditation for the International Soccer Academy of America. Is there a second?
Second.
With a motion and a second, any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Ms. DeLissa,
Yes.
Mr. Durham,
Yes.
Dr. Ernest,
Aye.
Dr. Freitas,
Yes.
Mr. Gastineau,
Yes.
Mr. Mapes,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Ms. Moat,
Yes.
Ms. Rentschler,
Yes.
Mr. Watts,
Yes.
Dr. Jenner.
Yes.
Motion passes 11-0.
The next new business item we have is school accreditation for the Life Christian STEAM Academy.
So we have one additional request for accreditation, and it's from Life Christian STEAM Academy, which is a K through 1 school in Northwest Indiana. They have been in operation for 2 years. Upon submitting all of their material to the department in revised material, the department's final recommendation is to grant accreditation. In this case, the school has met all of the legal standards, has curriculum in place, and has successfully demonstrated they are capable of meeting the legal standards set forth in the board's policies and procedures.
Chad, I just want to clarify. Did you say they have been in operation for 2 years?
Correct. They have been in operation for 2 years. And
Okay.
I should say that they operate as a K-1 currently with
Okay.
plans on expanding as the students progress.
Okay. Thank you for that point
Thank
of
you.
clarification. I know we've all had a chance to review the memo, but any questions for Chad?
Motion to approve staff recommendation.
We have a motion to approve the staff recommendation, which is to approve the school accreditation of Life Christian STEAM Academy. Do we have a second?
Second.
With a motion and a second, any discussion? With no discussion, roll call, please.
Ms. DeLissa,
Yes.
Mr. Durham,
Yes.
Dr. Ernest,
Aye.
Dr. Freitas,
Yes.
Mr. Gastineau,
Yes.
Mr. Mapes,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Ms. Moat,
Yes.
Ms. Rentschler,
Yes.
Mr. Watts,
Yes.
and Dr. Jenner.
Yes.
Motion is approved, 11-0. We will notify the school.
The next new business item we have is homeschool exits.
So what you have in front of you is a memo delivered to the board requesting approval of the process for conducting the excessive homeschool audits and the process that will be used by the department when auditing homeschool exits for the following school year. It should be fairly familiar. It mirrors the policy adopted by the board last year, or initially adopted by the board last year. And again, it will go into effect, and once approved, Maggie from the department will notify schools of the process, provide additional information, and we'll get that underway. So any questions about homeschool exit process?
And just to, again, to be clear, this is as a result of a law that was passed. So we as a board are administratively implementing that law with
Correct.
fidelity.
Correct.
Any questions for Chad? BJ?
Just a comment for you as well as Chad. I do appreciate kind of the landing strip that you provided with this. We're just doing what's set in statute. Like, there's nothing we can
Yeah.
do with that. But I know that schools, I've heard from schools that do appreciate kind of the landing strip that they were given to work into this. So thank you.
And I
Thank
should
you
note,
for saying
this is
that.
the third year. So in year one, notice was sent out. Year two, there were some modifications to the process, and then this will be, what I would call full implementation of the statute.
That heads up as opposed to this coming in July and saying, hey, here's what we're doing in August, which
Yeah.
we do
Which
sometimes.
happens
That
sometimes,
does happen.
and we don't prefer that, but yes.
This was handled really, really well, so job well done.
Thank you, Mr. Watts. Any other questions for Chad? All right, do we have a motion?
So moved.
We have a motion to approve the homeschool exits audit process. Is there a second?
Second.
With a motion and a second, any discussion? With no discussion, roll call, please.
Ms. DeLissa,
Yes.
Mr. Durham,
Yes.
Dr. Ernest,
Aye.
Dr. Freitas,
Yes.
Mr. Gastineau,
Yes.
Mr. Mapes,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Ms. Moat,
Yes.
Ms. Rensselaer,
Yes.
Mr. Watts,
Yes.
Dr. Jenner.
Yes.
Approved 11-0, and the department will be back with the results of that audit later this year, December or January.
Okay, we will be moving on to discussion items. Discussion item A and B are in a combined presentation, just for your heads up as a board. Discussion item C will be its own presentation, and it will be very short and as a kickoff to the dashboard. So the bulk of the information that you'll be seeing today is in discussion item A and B. And just to level set a bit before I ask Dr. Flores to come up, recently as a board, we've talked a lot about the excitement with regard to student pathways. We've had the Heartland Career Center come in. We've had Evansville Ramp program. And we've had many other conversations, especially in our listening sessions over the past 6 months, about the momentum in Indiana to ensure our students have the right fit and seamless pathways to blur the lines again between K-12, higher ed, and workforce. Yet we also know, in order to set students up for the best success so that in high school they have this experiential learning opportunity, we must ensure the foundations are solid prior to the time they arrive. And that includes, and this is a conversation you as a board have talked about for years and years, as well as our General Assembly and our educators, that includes literacy by 3rd grade. It's a must. The development of math skills, including STEM and project-based learning. So these fundamentals are essential, and that's again what we will see some data on coming up. We know that iLearn is one of multiple data points our schools use to really understand where a student's learning is. It's one of multiple. It is a way, yes, we're following federal law and state law by having it, but it's also a way for us as a state to know where all students are. So I encourage you again as we move forward to really think through the data, ask questions. Dr. John Keller is in the back. I often jokingly call some of his quotes, and he's so embarrassed right now, I know, Kellerisms. He's full of this wisdom that just flows out. But when we were looking at this data before today, he talked about, if this is a 20-chapter book, we really know only the first 5 chapters at this time. I mean, this is just the beginning in what we know in response to COVID-19 and the impact. So want to make that clear. But 3 key points that I want to humbly share, just a level set. The first thing, this data cannot be an indictment on anyone, on anything, on any school. The reality is all of us had a global pandemic. And I want to emphasize this, we have multiple times. Our Indiana educators have worked tirelessly, and we have impressive rates of in-person instructional mode and how they pivoted. And so cannot say enough praise for what our Indiana educators did over the past year, all considering. The other thing we had, and this is absolute compliment to our educators, to our parents, to our students, 97% of Hoosier students participated in this assessment, which, as Dr. Bedebener, you shared from the perspective of the National Center for Assessment, our state comes in with some of the most robust data in the country. And again, that is because of you, our educators, our parents and students who were able to allow us a level of information. This data also establishes a new baseline for us as a state. The second key point, these are not problems that anyone can fix overnight. And I think, Mr. Mapes, you've referred to this in the past too. I mean, this is going to take an extended effort just to get us back to where we were. And it's imperative on that, and you hear us talking about this repeatedly. I've already said it once today, but it's imperative we all come together, work together. It's not about admiring the problem. We have to focus on solutions, and that means we as schools need our communities and others to come around to help us, our families to provide the support. The third key point is, while you'll see student learning was impacted across the board as a result of the pandemic, our most at-risk students, including our racially and ethnically diverse, our low income, our special education students, and our English language learner students, had persistent learning and educational achievement gaps even prior to the global pandemic. And the data you're about to see shows a level, going to show the proficiency, and then it's also, we're going to get into some of the growth data as well, which is very interesting. But those are three key points that I think we have to keep front of mind as we, as a state, review this data. So without further ado, let's have Dr. Flores come up. Dr. Flores serves as the Indiana Department of Education Chief Academic Officer. Lynn Schemmel, we're so glad to have. We introduced you to her in the past. She was worked for a school district as of a few months ago. We're thrilled to have her on the team. She's our Director of Assessment for the state. Maggie Payno is here, comes with a wealth of knowledge as our Director of Accountability. Ron Sandlin is here, Senior Director of School Performance and Transformation. And there are others in the room as well, but I think you have the floor at this time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to share this information with you. And again, to provide some foundational considerations, I do want to turn it over to our colleague at the Center for Assessment just to share some of his insights before I dig into some of our state-specific perspective.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Before I start, one thing that I want to sort of emphasize, that we're going to be talking about academic impact today. This is no way to minimize the other types of impacts that have students have suffered: financial, social, emotional. We all know that this took heavy impacts in many ways, and so the focus here will be on something specific, but recognizing that there's much going on, and ultimately the solution will probably require going beyond just sort of the academics to lift them back up. So as Dr. Jenner mentioned, I get to work with many states, about a dozen states so far, on looking at academic impacts due to the pandemic. And one of the best states that I get to work with is you all. Indiana has what I believe sort of the most comprehensive set of data to look at this that I've seen. Your iLearn test is well established going back to the I-STEP. Your participation rates were very high. The administration of it went without any hiccups, and thus I sort of feel as though the data is actually going to give a very good snapshot of what's going on. That said, everyone wants to look at the data, and when people see their 2021 data, what are they going to do? They want to go back and compare it to 2019 data and do subtraction. So that's the first thing that people are going to do. And in particular, they're probably going to want to subtract proficiency rates. That is probably not going to be a good indicator for districts to use. Clearly, if you see a huge drop in proficiency rates, it probably suggests a problem, but there's better ways to go about looking at the academic impact, and we'll be sharing those with you today. Overall, I thought, coming into this, I was sort of thinking, what am I going to find? And ultimately, what I ended up finding was close to what I thought was maybe a worst case scenario in terms of the losses and the impacts that we're actually seeing in terms of the scores. So I don't want to be Downer Damien coming up and sort of saying...
You just coined that term, by the way.
My first name's Damien, so...
Yeah.
But I do want to try to be faithful to the data and be honest about it, and hopefully have an honest discussion of what picture it paints for the students in Indiana. And as Dr. Jenner mentioned, when you see a big dip, ultimately think of it as we have a hill to climb now, or a hole to come out of. And my task was, in a sense, to understand how deep the hole is. And the hole is pretty deep. And so that ultimately means it's going to take a lot of effort to climb out of it. And those efforts don't happen immediately. So expectations that somehow kids will just get back to normal in a couple months are probably, in fact, almost certainly unrealistic. That we really need to sort of think of this as a long-term effort to sort of help pull these students back up to where they were, and in some cases where they were wasn't that great, ultimately take them beyond that. So I think with that, I'm going to turn this back over to Charity, and she's going to get into some of the details, and I will, of course, be available to answer any questions that you might have.
So in terms of the conversation today, we're going to walk through some of our initial results and findings, and then segue into some key recommendations from the state perspective. And I will move fairly quickly through some of our initial results, mainly because, as Dr. Benner mentioned, changes in proficiency really indicate that we need to do some additional levels of analysis to understand the potential impact. So simply doing some gross comparisons of the change in proficiency just identifies a number of students that moved between being proficient and not. But through our academic impact analysis, we're actually digging across the entire continuum of performance to understand that impact. And I'm going to pause for 1 second and take a quick drink. My apologies. So as we mentioned, our participation rates were very high for Indiana this year. So this slide highlights for you across our state and federally mandated assessments the level of engagement. Federally, in a normal year, we would be expected to maintain that 95% threshold. We met and exceeded that in all of our assessments except WIDA, and that was just barely. And then with our alternate assessment, which assesses our 1% population, those with significant cognitive disabilities. So as Dr. Benner mentioned, we had a very robust data set and a very full sample to begin to analyze and draw some of our conclusions. This year, with ISTEP, we delivered that to grade 11 students. We were required to deliver an assessment to a full cohort of students, and Indiana is in the midst of transitioning to our college entrance examination for our subsequent school year. And so this year, our grade 11 students participated in ISTEP as a full cohort. We also delivered I Learn Biology as an end of course assessment, and then an optional U.S. government assessment. So as I transition into ISTEP results, I do want to note an asterisk as we review this data set, because these were grade 11 students and our typical cohort of students would have been grade 10. So in essence, these students were exposed to additional content beyond that 10th grade year, and so the results did differ slightly. So iStep was an anomaly in terms of performance for this year because we actually grew in terms of overall performance. In English language arts, we saw an increase of 4% proficiency, and in math, 2%. In terms of the different student populations or student groups, as we dig into some of these additional data sets, and again, I'll move fairly quickly, what you are seeing in terms of ethnicity is very common in terms of that distribution. So again, as we dig into some of our academic impacts later, this is an anomaly for iStep in terms of those slightly increasing SES. That distribution is represented as is typical. Again, special education students typically perform lower than our general education students. English language learners perform lower than our non-English language learners, and then gender distributions remain stable as well. We do have a very small population of students that participate in our optional U.S. government assessment. For biology, that performance remained very similar to what was expected. So now I'll transition into our iLearn results, and just to provide a little bit of a recap, 2019 was our first year of delivering iLearn operationally. So that was done in spring of 2019, and then that summer we moved into standard setting where educator panels came in, reviewed the assessment, reviewed the items, looked at student performance, and set those initial cut scores that would be used from that point forward. At that point in time, we considered 2019 to be our baseline year, and then 2020 happened. In light of the pandemic, we did not deliver a spring assessment last year, so we do not have any data for comparison for 2020. Going into 2021 spring administrations, we were very mindful from the very beginning that this data set would be very important to understand the academic impact of our students. So one of the key considerations from an assessment delivery and design perspective is the ability to maintain validity of that data set for interpretation. And to do that, we made the decision back in July of 2020 that we were going to continue to deliver our assessment in person. We knew the risk that participation at some point may not be as high as anticipated or desired, but in order to have a sound validity argument, the standardization of that administration must be maintained. So we came out with that specific guidance last summer and held to that expectation in light of some of the transitions to having more on-site instruction. We were able to have that strong participation rate in the spring. But at the end of the day, with some of the changes that we will see in the next few slides and with the academic impact, we are really utilizing spring 2021 as our new baseline going forward, our opportunity to grow from. So as we engaged in planning for spring, one of the key points that we wanted to communicate and make sure was well understood is that the original intent or premise of assessment is to measure student performance. So over time, there have been lots of other consequences or high stakes applied to assessment. This year, in light of the pandemic, some of those high stakes aspects were removed. So ultimately, our intent for the assessment was to give us a measure of student performance. As mentioned, our assessment was delivered as intended. Our window remained the same. So again, in terms of those validity arguments, all of those are still sound. And we did allow a few considerations locally in terms of the test administration. We were allowing additional proctors and some flexibility around some of those requirements. We did have some students that, because of health issues, needed to have someone come on site to deliver that assessment. So there were times when flexibility was granted, but ultimately we had a vast majority of students participating on site. So now I'll transition to our overall pass rates. And just to provide a little bit of context here, in terms of some of the bars that you see, the yellow is representing English language arts. And for those of you that were part of the conversation a couple of years ago when we set cut scores, the pattern of those bars and how they go across from grades 3 through 8 is very similar to how standard setting resulted. And as you think about the English language arts content, many of those foundational skills remain intact over time, but there are some changes in expectations regarding text complexity. But essentially the performance expectation remains the same. As you look at the blue bars for mathematics, you will notice that they decrease, and that pattern for the blue aligns as well to the standard setting process that was conducted in 2019. There is a shift in content expectations that happens around grade 6 as students move into more abstract thinking and application, algebra and functions that really provides a new set of rigor in terms of expectations. And so that is kind of some rationale about why you're seeing a shift there. Now, I noted that the pattern remains similar from 2019, but the actual proficiency level has gone down. So in terms of mathematics performance, we did see a decrease if we were to compare from 2019 of about 11% in mathematics and about 8% overall in English language arts. So again, those percentages are just noting the number of students that moved from proficient to not proficient. So when we get into the academic impact, we're going to have a much more robust insight into all students and not just those that move from proficient to not. So I do want to make that distinction for you. As we move into our student group tables and charts, I do want to note that one idea that we thought about as we were starting to dig into the data analysis is if there would be any changes in distribution across student groups based on the pandemic. And one thing that we did identify, and this will be reflected again in some of the other information we review today, is that in general, there was a decrease that was very constant across all student groups. So there wasn't a certain group that stood out greatly in terms of a proficiency change. All of them kind of decreased uniformly, if that makes sense.
And to pause there, I think that was kind of surprising as we hypothesized what might happen. We thought that the proficiency, we might have more exacerbated gaps with our most at-risk students. So that is we found that to be an interesting takeaway from this data. So just to highlight that, and not to be confused with what is coming when we shift to growth,
Correct.
where we did see some additional impact, but just wanted to point that out.
So I'll again move fairly quickly through these, again, because the patterns remain similar to what we expected to occur. All of these demonstrated kind of a constant decrease in performance. So SES, Then we have special education. And again, these are aggregated across grade levels as well. English learner. And our gender distribution. Following today's board meeting, we will be releasing this data publicly for further review. And there are a few additional data points that will be provided in terms of attendance rates and modes of instruction. We are continuing to analyze that data. That is very late breaking information in terms of receiving that data from schools. So I believe it was as of Thursday, we had started to kind of culminate that into the release publicly today. So that will be continued phases of work that we collaborate with the Center for Assessment to better understand. But in terms of full transparency, we wanted to share that information as well alongside these proficiency rates, just to paint a picture of what we see represented so far.
So just to pause there, so what you will see, and it was Thursday close of business, we extended that deadline for schools to get as much robust data in. So again, close of business Thursday, our team immediately started analyzing internally at DOE. We sent the data to Center for Assessment as well, who will do additional analyses. But for data questions, you'll see, so every school in the state, regardless of school type, who submitted data will show percentage of weeks in-person instruction 5 days a week, percentage of weeks hybrid instruction, percentage of weeks virtual instruction. That's going to be, disaggregated on a 10% mark, so 0 to 10%, 10% to 20%. And then it will also show a column regarding absenteeism. Or actually, I think it's attendance rate. I think it's stated, it's stated in the positive, it's stated attendance rate. So that will be transparently shared for anyone who is interested in taking a look at that.
Can we bring Dr. Bennett back up for a second?
Let's bring him back up. Charity, you can take another drink of water.
Yeah. So, in the state of Indiana, everybody had different types of access to their students based on their local health department and whether or not they allowed to be in person and how many days a week and at what grade levels. And I serve a school district here in Marion County. So our kids 6 through 12 were into a hybrid mode from our first day of school until April 5th.
Okay.
And yet my colleagues who just across the county line were able to serve their kids daily. And so the instruction amount compared to previous years where kids are in school all the time are obviously different.
Correct.
What does that do to the data?
So if, let's say this sort of plays out exactly as you sort of said, let's say that in your district, kids did not have the ability or opportunity to learn that kids in another district did, then one might say that students in your district had more unfinished learning than perhaps other students. And if the test is validly measuring the student's ability on this content, then you would likely see bigger impacts in your district than the other district.
So Dr. Bedebenner, that exact question, I believe, is going to be part of your phase 1 study?
Correct.
So, which will be coming out later this summer. We're trying to get them data as fast as we can. So I just wanted to share that with you. And sorry to interrupt if you were going to say something else.
Where I'm going with that is, I really don't want to use 2021 as my baseline, because I'd much rather have another year with my kids and see where we get them to kind of make that the start of where we're going to grow from. Because if things get back to normal and we're able to have students every day, then our goal right now is that gap. And working in the 21-22 school year to close that gap and then see where we're at again. And then that kind of, to me, in my mind, is my new starting point.
If I understand what you're saying, what you're seeing now is sort of, obviously it's artificial because we've gone through this very novel circumstance that sort of led this. So when things get back to normal, in a sense, my hope is that we see these accelerated rates of learning. And if you're familiar with the way economists talk about this, the dream scenario is the V-shaped recovery. We drop down and we bounce back up. There's other types of shapes of recoveries that aren't as sort of nice. There's that U-shaped recovery, which is a little bit more gradual. Then there's the L-shaped one where you drop down and you really sort of never catch back up. And then the worst one, I guess, is you drop and you just sort of keep dropping. So the data that you'll get now is meant to, like you said, be the first chapter in a many chapter book, and ideally follow-up data, interim data will hopefully paint the picture of a V-shaped recovery for the majority of districts and schools in the state where things are really racing back to normal.
The other thing I would add to that is we're going to work with the National Center for Assessment in a progress monitoring state. So here's where we are today. Here are, I called it the first 5 chapters. You as a researcher could be right. It might be our first chapter. But then the progress monitoring and what happens from here and what do we know. So I mean, I think some of this is evolving based on the data and as we learn, but important to have these types of conversations as we work through it, for sure.
And one point to this that we're walking a fine line here, and Dr. Jenner mentioned this in her opening remarks. This can easily turn into a finger-pointing exercise, and one that I think is counterproductive to sort of looking forward and sort of helping students out.
And we are standing strong. It is counterproductive. We have to, right? We have to look ahead.
I agree, and that this is the situation we're in based upon the best efforts that we could. Let's figure out how to get out of this situation.
May I ask a follow-up? I'm sorry.
No, thank you.
And I will absolutely accept coaching that I'm going into an unproductive rabbit hole. This just, my mind is running in terms of the point that Pat raises about for all of the districts and these really high participation rates and the differences in instructional time across them dependent on instructional modality. Do we know yet how many of them are, from that the total amount of test takers in that pot, how many of those kids percentage-wise are in the I had much less time in the classroom because I was in a remote setting or hybrid, as opposed to I had a pretty normal experience. To Pat's question of does it make sense, like again, just for the really understanding the lay of the land perspective, to use this set of results as a baseline. In other words, how significant is the disruption or disparity between the amount of instructional time for the kids that took these tests?
I have not seen that data yet. From what Charity just spoke there and what Dr. Jenner pointed to and what's available, it appears as though you have fairly granular data to look at. Broadly, what I'm seeing, and if there's a great takeaway from all of this, is that schools actually do teach kids a lot of stuff. And when a pandemic comes along and you basically pull the rug out, you see sort of in a sense, it's like, wow, kids really were impacted. you could see that if there are groups that weren't impacted, it makes you pause and think, were they really ever sort of learning a lot before? And so.
Anyway, thanks. And I want to also provide the opportunity, Dr. John Keller, if you have anything to add on this point with regard to data. If you don't, that's fine too, but I know that you've been deep into the weeds on at least the collection process, where we go from here, how do we use this analyzation, and then you also will be the one to press send to National Center for Assessment. I thought we already did press send on instructional mode data, but it will be coming to you if it's not already there. Go ahead, Dr. Keller.
Yeah, as of Thursday, we had 195 million attendance records, and we are collecting daily attendance for every student for the first time ever. So that's the underlying data in the spreadsheet that was released on our website today. But there's a ton more analysis that needs to be done to really suss out the probably the asymmetric impact of those things across geographic regions, subjects, and things like that. So more to come.
Katie, can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
John, when you talk about attendance, are you breaking that down into in-person attendance versus hybrid attendance versus?
Basically, we have 8 attendance codes, and then the data that's being released today took the dominant instructional mode for a school in each of the weeks of the school year, and that's what's being presented today. But we actually have it at the student level. In fact, in some cases, we have it at the half-day level. People are able actually to report absent in the morning, present in the afternoon, or absent in the morning, virtual in the afternoon. So we have a very good level of granularity.
And to pause on that, just for your information, I mentioned earlier the amount of self-reported data that we really had to depend on during COVID. And Dr. Keller has led the data modernization for the DOE beginning July 1. And certainly there are always kinks anytime you kick off something new, but beginning July 1, we have as a state and locals invested and focused on EdFi, ED-FI technology, which will allow local school corporations, regardless of their student learning management system, and the state system to talk together. And that is so many benefits. Hopefully it's fewer reports for schools to submit. It also allows us as a state to have more real-time data. We'll likely have weekly data updates, status updates. So just wanted to also, that is a positive that we have coming as a state, and John has led that.
Yeah, typically Indiana certifies its attendance at the end of the school year, and for obvious reasons, because that's when you know everything. But we will be collecting on a weekly basis, so we'll have a lot of our data collection now with our modernized platforms will have much more transactional feel. There will be certain times when you do certify your data, and you're, especially for money-related accounts and things like that. But the flow of data will be much more every day, and we should be able to do some more dynamic reporting as we get more familiar with the system.
And my point, just as a point of reference, our kids 6 through 12 were in person first semester 26 days. Second semester 64 days. And that's why I say, how do you look at this data and make it really make sense when I know throughout the state there were other secondary kids 6 through 12 who were in twice as many days as what my kids were in person.
Or almost every day.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a great point. It's a great question. And that will be, again, a part of the next phase of, I think it's actually my understanding. Charity, Dr. Flores, you're going to get into this, I think, on some of the research questions and phasing so that you can see some of what we will learn as we continue forward. Yeah. So keep the questions coming.
Yeah. One of the last things I'll say is just that, for the data that you just mentioned, Dr. Mapes, we'll be needing to look at questions like, when did those days occur? Did they occur before the test? Like all of those things will be of material interest as we do the analysis.
Mr. Watts?
Katie, maybe you answered this, but did we fall on as far as establishing a baseline? Because again, comparing us and our health department allowed us to be in school every single day. Like we were in session every single day in Evansville, to a Perry Township who was prohibited from being in person every day. I don't understand how we compare those two. is what I don't
So I'll pause on that, and I think this question is important. I think we have to yield to the researchers.
Yeah.
What we know today is that the baseline we had, and by the way, you all push on me anything, but the baseline that we had in 2019 is no longer our baseline in Indiana. Our baseline is 2021. Now, if that changes, I think we have to depend on our experts to guide us there. It's an important question to capture, but as of 2021 data, we have a new baseline in Indiana. And again, Dr. Flores, Dr. Bedabiner, you're our experts, and we're leaning on you. So if there's anything, please feel welcome.
And Katie, I mean, I'm okay with that, because we're going to grow. That's going to be a great start.
You're going to grow.
That's where I was headed,
But at
because
the same time,
Perry Township is going to have a V. We hope.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's
A V
kind of my
growth.
point about,
We hope. I'm not going to.
Oh, no, it's going to look as a V. And
I'm pounding on wood for you right now.
at that point in time,
probably not
that's
wood.
kind of a false.
Yeah. Yes.
You know, I mean,
I do.
I'm good with that
Yeah.
number, because I'm going to really look great. But at the same time, that next year really becomes
Yeah.
the proof in the pudding, because we hope to get them caught up.
Yeah.
Now, where do we take them?
And I think, that question is keeping me up at night a bit on, Dr. Flores, we're going to pass it over to you soon, because this is obviously something we need to talk about. But next year is going to be yet another data point that we need to analyze. The following year is going to be like, this is, and I look at Dr. Bedabiner, when you talked about other, massive disruptions that happened throughout our country, and you mentioned Hurricane Katrina. I mean, it is not a 1 year and done analysis. We are going to have to continue this over a long period of time. And you know what? We could go we might set a record and go. We could keep talking about this all day long, couldn't we?
I really don't want to. I'm trying to forget 2021.
So let's keep moving forward on the presentation. Yeah.
Thank you.
So if there are any future references to baseline, the general premise is that that is a reference point for us in terms of managing the conversation today. I think, as Dr. Benner mentioned, if we see that V and are moving in that direction, this is the bottom point, that vertex in that diagram. The other thing that I would note in relationship to the conversation that we were having is instructional time is going to be one factor that can be analyzed in light of the pandemic. There are probably hundreds or thousands of other factors that contribute to some of the impacts that we're seeing. So while we will do our best to provide insight into that, we won't have data to dig into all of those other factors that happen even outside of school walls. So transitioning then into the academic impact analysis. So I will note up front that there are a few times where learning loss is referenced in quotations.
And Mr. Mapes left the room, so you know you're going to have to say that again when he gets back.
Unless we can get done before he gets back.
Yeah, unless you can, that's true.
Going forward, we are referencing this as academic impact, but some of the legislation and other things that we'll reference do use the term learning loss, so just to note that specifically. So Public Law 211 charged the department to conduct a learning loss study over the course of 2 years. What we will initially share today is, again, looking back at the impact over school year 2020, 2021, and then we will have updates as we progress through the analysis for 2021-22. We also have specific funds that are allocated to support learning loss, and so this analysis helps us ensure that as those funds are distributed, that they are aligned to our steps forward. So this impact study, again, as was noted, we collaborated with the National Center for Assessment to conduct this research. We have a longstanding partnership as they've been a great colleague with our accountability long-term, and so those growth calculations have been utilized to help support this analysis that we'll share today. As noted, we have a few different phases, and even within those phases, there's probably a few sub-steps that we'll navigate along the way. But phase 1 in general terms is our review of pandemic-related impact. So today we're participating in the presentation. We will have a formal report forthcoming as well in the coming weeks as we have had a little bit more time to dig into some of these other pieces we've touched on today. Some of our data, again, as we are closing out different collections from the school year are kind of late breaking, and so some of those things are still in transmission over to the National Center. Phase 2 will be a pivot as we're starting to transition from understanding impact, moving into recovery. So phase 2 is going to be initiated as we move into the 21-22 school year. We have several new data sources that are actually going to be available that were not fully available last school year, primarily related to our formative assessment providers. So with recent legislation, approved formative providers must send the department their data as well. So in addition to our summative assessments, we will be receiving all of our formative assessment data. In terms of the purpose of the study, this is going to be a kind of a high-level overview, and then we'll dig in a little bit more. But in simple terms, the study is really designed to identify who was impacted, what was impacted in terms of content or learning, and how much or to what degree were they impacted. So as we mentioned, and Dr. Jenner mentioned, we could spend time kind of admiring the problem, and so we today are taking this study and pivoting towards recovery from the information that's being shared. So at the culmination of our presentation, we will be sharing some specific recovery responses that we will be doing at the state level, and then also considerations locally as well. So within phase 1, 2 key questions that we have analyzed to date. The first is, to what extent did the disruptions in educational programming due to COVID-19 impact student achievement, performance, and learning outcomes? And then secondly, what is the anticipated recovery time associated with the identified academic impact? I will plant the seed here because it's one of those things that I think has to sink in a little bit when you think about recovery time, and we'll talk about it quite a bit going forward. This notion of recovery time is not simply returning back to normal learning conditions and expecting significant change to occur. This notion of recovery time requires intentional supplemental support for students. So as we quantify that in some slides coming up, that will be providing normal learning environments for students, but additional intentional supplemental supports as well on top of that time. The data sources that were used for this phase 1 analysis are iLearn 3.8, WIDA, which WIDA was an exception in terms of our data because that assessment was given in 2020 as well. So actually that assessment culminated right before COVID. So we actually were able to maintain that data set over time. And then we were able to validate our findings with NWA as well. We had about a 40% data set come in from NWA that was used as again, additional validation measure. We did not have data to analyze for K2. As a reminder, iLearn is not given at those grades, and because we did not have the requirement to date regarding the formative delivery of their data, we did not have sufficient data in those grades to analyze. And then, as I noted, as we went through our initial results for assessment, iStep was given to grade 11 students this year instead of grade 10. So in terms of comparability and trying to really understand that, we felt that it was not beneficial to utilize that data set at high school. In terms of defining some key terms that will be used through the remaining slides, there's two that I want to address most specifically. The first is academic impact, and academic impact is intended to represent whether student growth was any faster or slower than pre-pandemic student growth. And just to again paint a picture for you, we did not see faster growth in light of the pandemic. So all of the findings that we will be sharing today, all of the growth was slower. And in terms of recovery time, again, it's defined as students returning to normal learning conditions and then having supplements of some degree in order to provide additional support and grow more quickly. The duration of recovery time is dependent upon the degree of academic impact. So as we move through some of our tables in a few moments, you will see a few areas where there is some significant impact and some that is moderate. The duration will vary, the intended duration will vary based on that determination. Is there anything you want to share before I move on?
Let me just try to sort of illustrate this situation with an analogy. Students are passing through the system with a certain educational velocity. And if you think of the pandemic as a headwind, and essentially it sort of slowed things down. And that's really what we're trying to see. And because distance equals rate times time, if you slow down because of weather, you're going to have to sort of go faster if you want to sort of catch back up. And so what Charity was saying about the supplemental piece is really important, because if we slow down and we just get back to the speed we normally went, we don't really catch up again. So there's this whole notion of where we really have to accelerate here beyond what was sort of the normal rate of progress before. And that likely involves a lot of additional things to help kids do that.
It's a great illustration. I think we'll note to have a whiteboard here next time and you can draw it out for us. It's good.
So we have a few colors that signify some levels of significance as we review the tables in the subsequent slides. Red, when we see red, that is going to align to significant recovery time needed for students. That recovery time will exceed 1 school year. And again, research from other types of catastrophic events it implies it could be 3 to 5 years. For some students, it may be more, but that significant indicates that that recovery time exceeds 1 year. Orange represents recovery time of up to 1 school year and likely requires supplemental academic support as well. In a very isolated instance, we will see minor to no reference today, and that is where recovery time is minimal with minor deviations from historical performance. So in terms of some major takeaways, first let's touch on how much. So this is to what extent were students impacted academically by the COVID-19 pandemic. The impacts that we observed are substantial. In the tables that we will review, they range from moderate to significant. We will see a lot of orange and red today. When we compare the impact from iLearn to some of our other data sets, WIDA access, that data set also confirms that there was significant impact for our English language learner population. And as I mentioned, we will have some data sets where we need to explore a little further, but we have some isolated contexts where minor to no impacts were observed. And again, we need to better understand the services, the supports, the instruction that was potentially occurring pre-pandemic to understand why going through a pandemic led to very minor impacts if we're seeing such significant ones in other places. So we looked at mathematics and English language arts. Those were the two primary data sets. In mathematics, we will see that there were significant academic impacts, and that aligns to that overall proficiency that we observed with the iLearn data set. In English language arts, we observed moderate to significant academic impacts. Our English language proficiency, again, our WIDA assessment, demonstrated significant academic impacts. We did not analyze other subject areas, but based on the data that we're finding from English language arts and mathematics, it's assumed that some of these same findings apply to those as well. And for whom were where the impact really was focused, grades 3 through 8, in terms of what we observed in iLearn, we saw that decrease across the board. That remains true here as well. In terms of our student groups, again, that was a comparable impact across all of those as well. English learners, we will walk through those charts. That's, again, an area where we need to spend some time and better understand what may be reflected in the data there. But in general, across corporations and schools, the impacts were variable to some degree, but most corporations and schools experienced significant academic impacts. The first summary that I want to share is the overall impact across grades 3 through 8 in English language arts and mathematics. So on this chart, you'll notice that mathematics represents a significant impact across the board, which means that recovery time will be greater than 1 year required, and that greater than 1 year also implies that intentional supplemental support is being provided to students to accelerate their learning. In English language arts, we observed a moderate to significant impact across all grades. And that will imply, and again, this is student specific, recovery times of about a year, extending beyond that full year in order to return to pre-pandemic performance. The next slide represents student groups in terms of ethnicity. So I'll let you take a moment to review this. So we do have impacts here from moderate to significant all the way through significant. So our mathematics column aligns similarly to what we just observed in grade level. And you will notice that we have 3 student groups that are noted as significant on the left. We have Asian, Black, and Hispanic. And I will ask Dr. Bettenbender to come up because I think there are some important considerations as we think through how growth relates to these populations in terms of interpretation.
Thank you. So one of the aspects that to consider when you're looking at what's going on by ethnic group is to sort of understand that when you see the moderate to significant versus significant, the significant is meaning that in a sense their velocity decreased the most prior to what actually occurred before. To give you sort of a base, the base rate of velocity historically is 50 across all student groups. If you look, for example, at Asians, their base rate was above 60, and they dropped down into the 40s. African Americans' base rate was a little bit below 50, and they dropped down. So we're looking at this sort of decrease in a sense. The amount of the headwind sort of slowed the group down and its impact. And some of the groups have small ends, and that makes it so one wants to be careful and not necessarily over-interpreting the small groups. As you'll see, we're starting to, when you dig into the data more, you're going to end up finding groups that had sort of larger impacts than others. And ultimately that just sort of means that they slowed down more in terms of their learning progress.
Circling back to that point we had before, so is it a fair statement in Indiana that while our learning gaps were not exacerbated in ethnicity with proficiency, our learning gaps with ethnicity are exacerbated with regard to growth? Is that a correct statement? Or
Yes.
is that the best way to say it?
Yeah. And always remember, because distance equals rate times time, that growth and achievement are opposite sides of the same coin. If you're starting behind and you want to become high attaining, you've got to go fast.
Yeah.
And if you're starting high and you don't go very fast, you don't go very far. So once you have groups that are starting and then there's different rates, we can exacerbate gaps or we can close gaps. Closing gaps will ultimately usually involve one group has to learn faster than the other group, otherwise they sort of maintain their distance apart.
Yes, thank you.
So then transitioning into our English learner status, and we'll have a few other data points to share as well as we look at some WIDA data. But our English learner population reflects significant impacts in both English language arts and mathematics, which is slightly different than our aggregate data that we were seeing on the initial slide. Special education status, I do want to pause here because there is a slight variance as we look at this slide in particular in relationship to some of the other slides that we observed where we may expect to see more significant impact as a result of the pandemic, but we're observing moderate to significant. So as we reflect on this data, it's important to consider what pre-pandemic supports may have looked like for students, and if this is an area where we need to apply some additional levels of support, even though it reflects moderate to significant, it may be that some students need more significant support in order to accelerate as well. Our gender impacts, again, reflect similarly to our overall aggregate that was shared at the beginning across grades 3 through 8. Our students who are receiving free and reduced price lunch, those are reflecting significant impacts across both English language arts and mathematics. And now we'll touch on WIDA for a brief moment as well. So I'll walk through 3 slides here just because there's a variance as we progress through the grade levels. But the first set of grades that we observe is grades 1 through 4. We reflect that as having a significant impact for those students as a result of the pandemic. As we transition into 5 through 8, that changes to moderate, or we have one that's showing moderate to significant. So again, that's a place where we probably need some further analysis to better understand the level of support being provided to students pre-pandemic. And then we have our one instance on that final slide of minor to no impact. So again, knowing all of the data that we've seen up to this point and the levels of significance shared, I would offer some pause on this slide to understand the support for students in grades 9 through 12 to really understand if they received greater support and that is why they're showing minor to no impact, or if the support was maybe not as robust pre-pandemic. So that's, again, an area where we need to pause and reflect and better understand pre-pandemic performance and why that did not change alongside some of these others that we see were clearly significant in light of the pandemic. So I'll summarize in terms of 2 types of issues. The first are some thoughts around issues that are likely associated directly to the pandemic. We observed that there is a significant impact across mathematics, that we had some moderate to significant in ELA, but it was not as significant as mathematics. But it is assumed that generally students were impacted across grades K through 12 across content areas in light of the pandemic. The final key takeaway is that to really put the pedal down, accelerate our learning, we are at a pivotal point to engage in new strategies. So if we return simply to normal learning environments pre-pandemic, as Dr. Bettenbender mentioned, we will not accelerate learning. So this is a critical point that we need to really put the gas pedal down and focus on those efforts. The second type of issue is an area where we may need to dig into potential pre-existing challenges that were happening even before the pandemic occurred. So as we saw with our WIDA access data, it shows no decline in some areas or moderate impact for some grades, which does not necessarily correlate to some of the other data sets that we observed. We also saw that our lowest achievers showed very little decline during the pandemic. So again, thinking about how we best support students going forward. So before I transition into the third segment, which is some recommendations for recovery, I do want to pause and see if there's any other questions related to the impact portion.
I think we're all thinking. Let's keep moving. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So as I mentioned, this effort, this transition to recovery will need to be sustained. This will take more than a year, at least. It will need to be intentional, very strategic efforts going forward. One thing that we haven't touched on because we have been looking at aggregate data is it will need to be individualized. Students are going to be coming into classrooms with very different levels of understanding. So as we walk through some of these next pieces of information, I think you'll glean some of those ideas. It will need to be a comprehensive, multi-year response. And to support that response, two key elements are really going to be understanding the data, continuing to dig into the data and better understand the data, managing this notion of academic impact, and coming alongside that, we really have unprecedented funding available in many different ways to provide some extra support for students. So being very mindful of those opportunities and how we can best target those funds to student needs. So in terms of schools' response and thinking about educators in the classroom, again, as I mentioned, what will be critical is that notion of acceleration. We can't simply return to the learning environments that we may have had pre-pandemic. Revisiting our upcoming lesson designs, looking at our data to reflect students' current level of understanding. Again, knowing some of our student groups and the significant impact that relates directly to some of those student groups in particular, it is critical to keep in mind that one size will not fit all. So as we think about a classroom of students, all of those students are coming in with different levels of understanding, with different levels of need, and need direct support as an individual student. With strategic support, some considerations may be, again, this is going to be tied to some of the funding that's available. If schools or corporations have the means to do so, research shows having smaller group instruction allows for intentional support for students. So that is one strategy that can be applied. We have really established strong relationships, and we've heard a lot from corporations in terms of those community partners that are coming alongside to provide additional resources and support, even thinking through time outside of school. Making sure that we're really scaffolding lesson designs to think about, again, where students are. That at the end of the day, we need to be sure that we're aligning to grade level content, but some students may need scaffolding to actually access the grade level content. And so being very intentional about those strategies. Ensuring that we are judicious in applying formalized education plans. So again, knowing that some of our significant impacts occurred with student groups that have needs defined, we need to be tailoring instruction to those students to accelerate their learning. It is a time for us to be bold and innovative. Again, trying to think beyond what we've always done with some of the funding and resources that we have. And again, this cannot be a focused effort over a few weeks or a few months. This will take likely past this school year, maybe 3, maybe 5. The gas pedal will need to be down for a while. So we will need to drive this acceleration forward for some time. I will note, with literacy and math, this is an area where our state is spending some time to determine how we can come alongside as well to support schools in those foundational skills. So those are some areas that we'll be sharing more detail about in the coming months. But really looking at how much time we are spending in STEM activities in early literacy to ensure that students have fully recovered in those areas so that we can open those opportunities for post-secondary later. Again, the key takeaway is we need to work towards grade level instruction, remediating students as they need additional support, and ensuring that understanding of those fundamental grade level standards. At the state level, as I mentioned, we are going to be delivering some key plans associated with literacy and STEM in the coming months. We also have some efforts around data analysis. Again, as we receive and consume and analyze data, that data will be shared out with schools and corporations, but we are establishing protocols to analyze all of that data coming your way. In terms of intervention strategies and support, we have since March been sharing several research-based models that have proven to be successful, and we will continue. We have about 10 or 12 people on our DOE staff right now that are dedicated as part of a research effort to really dig in and continue to provide those models out as examples. And we want to spend time also as successes occur across the state, as we analyze data and have growth, that we can share out some of those approaches as well. In terms of the funding availability, it's going to be critical that we capitalize on the significant emergency federal funding as well as the state dollars that have been made available. We have initiated a strategic planning consortia. We are utilizing the academic impact and what we know to be best practices as we evaluate grant opportunities. Those key best practices have been part of the criteria for evaluation to date to make sure that we are all moving forward in the same direction. And the final point that I want to make is how critical it is for us to continue to engage with community partners on this effort. We know that school corporations cannot do this alone, and so it will take all of us to really drive this effort forward. So again, we encourage school corporations to partner with community partners as well. Also engage conversations with parents and families. So while we have been really engaged in understanding the details and nuances of this data, some elements of this information also need to be shared with parents and families as they're starting the school year, knowing that this will be a sustained effort, that we will see this impact for some time. And making sure that we're adapting existing programs to serve those priorities that are at the local level. So I think that's the end of my formal presentation, but I can take any additional thoughts or questions that anyone might have.
I'm looking at faces, and I can tell a lot of processing going on. I mean, I've had a few days to think on it. It's a lot of information that we all statewide need to take some time, think on it, and obviously there will be a big local effort, and we at the department will be here to support. We're in this together. William?
Yeah, a lot of information. Great information, by the way. But as you were speaking and I was kind of reading along with you, the thought came to mind as we're talking about this acceleration that we're going to have to do. What types of additional training will educators have to go through so that all students are impacted by the acceleration that's going to need to take place? I'm just thinking about, as a former teacher, we're already differentiating in the classroom. Now we're going to accelerate our learning. So has any thought been, what consideration has been given to what that process would look like for training teachers to have this acceleration?
Can I start and then pass it to you? That is a question that we've talked about repeatedly. I've even spoken with some members of the board about that exact question. The reality is we have varying levels throughout every school individuals who feel ready to take this on, if that makes sense, who feel trained, varying levels of training. One example, and I hate to go straight to Mr. Mapes again, but we've had this conversation. And Mr. Mapes their district has a major partnership with the National Institute of Excellence in Teaching, NIET. Several other corporations have that partnership as well. So they are looking at this and off to the races in one certain way, right? And they feel as good as can be about hitting that V. Other corporations and schools we're getting calls, right, in a non-judgmental way saying we could use some additional support. So Dr. Flores and team, if you saw last week's weekly newsletter, you saw one of the strategies is that we're very focused on fundamentals by grade 10, so that experiential learning pathways can happen beyond that. And some districts need the additional support, of which we will tactically be focused on providing an opt-in situation for school corps who maybe don't have relationships like that or could use some additional pedagogy support. Dr. Flores, add to that.
Yeah. If I can boil it down to the simplest term, and this isn't going to address professional development per se, but I think one critical takeaway with instruction going forward is every single minute counts of quality instruction. So making sure that we're very intentional about the lessons being provided, that those are targeted for the student needs, and that we are just incredibly thoughtful about every instructional minute. If we return and conduct learning as is for a year for a vast majority of the students, as we saw, that won't get them beyond that level of significance. So every minute, every opportunity that we have with students has to be very intentional.
Thank you.
And I would say that's also, I mean, that is part of the chapters that are going to have to continue too. I mean, this is evolving. We recognize that, and I mean, certainly we're ready to deploy teams as helpful. It's really going to take local leadership driving the changes and the impact for kids. And again, we'll be ready to support that, but locally, it's going to be really important we keep our eye on, keep our focus on what truly matters. Yes?
Yeah, this isn't so much the question, I'm just trying to summarize, and you can respond if you want or whatever, but some things I heard you say, that status quo is not sufficient, that we have to not just get back to the same velocity, we have to accelerate to get to a higher velocity. One size doesn't fit all, right? And I heard you say we need to be bold. And so in terms of the state's relationship with locals, we want that incubator of innovation to be led from both the state and local. We're not putting any handcuffs, and we're encouraging people to do innovative things. The state can be the clearinghouse for sharing those things. We probably know some models already, which you referred to, and we can encourage folks to adapt one of those, but they need to do one or the other. Either adopt one of these things that we know that is worth trying, or to go ahead and try those innovative things, and then we'll track the results. But yeah, just just kind of going back to normal is not an option.
Right. Other thoughts, questions?
This may be a question for Damien. Have we seen this? Like Katrina would be the example that I could come up with. As someone who spent 20 years in the classroom, we've just heard for an hour about how diverse the learning levels and loss levels of our students are going to be when they come back. Trying to couple that with the increased acceleration of learning is somewhat unrealistic to me. Did we see that happen in other instances? I know there's not really been an entire world shut down that you could reference, but have we seen that happen on a smaller level? Because I feel like the two work against each other.
Yeah, short answer, I don't know. Katrina's sort of this touchstone example of where we see something really large that just came in and completely uprooted people's lives. The pandemic did it in different ways. Katrina, there was an exodus. Here, everyone was sort of shut down, and so I agree this to me is sort of unprecedented. I can imagine as a teacher, you may have students entering your classroom that doing things at levels that you're just not sort of familiar with. You're probably used to kids coming in within a certain range. Now all of a sudden they're not, and they're at different places. And then you're being told we need to go faster. And this isn't just a YouTube video that should go to 1.5x to sort of talk faster. There's got to be sort of different ways of doing this. One thing that I would sort of emphasize is that this is a new problem, but it's not a new problem.
Mm-hmm.
There have always been kids in the system that have needed these accelerated rates of learning to catch up. And to be honest, we really haven't come up with ways of doing it. Now there's a lot more that we want to do this for. And I guess I see this as a great opportunity to invent and to innovate. And I think, Mr. Miller, you sort of pointed out, to try to figure this out and ultimately put in a new status quo for how kids are learning. I mean, I'm old enough to people, some of you look like you're old enough. Remember when 55 miles an hour was the speed limit? And then it went up to 65, and in some states, what's the high speed limit in Indiana now? 75 on some places? 70. So I think the goal here is to sort of figure out how 70 can sort of become the new speed of learning in Indiana, whereas sort of in the past it wasn't that. And that will help those kids that were traditionally behind and help these new kids that are basically sort of have been pushed back due to the pandemic. But this is, I like the term incubator. How do we sort of do this? The catchy one now is high intensity tutoring. People are talking about bringing in supplemental tutors that try to help out. And there's supposedly good research around that. But I can also imagine a lot of sort of snake oil that goes with that as well, of people saying, we'll catch up a year's worth of loss in 2 weeks. And again, the crash diet approach to sort of, academic recovery.
I would observe the community colleges have been doing this for a while with co-requisite remediation. I mean, just like there may need to be to look at parallel spaces where they inherit students who open admission, in order to keep them moving, you have them enrolled in the remedial class and the 100 level class at the same time, and there's a lot of data on the efficacy of that for student retention and performance that could be parallel model to explore in the K-12 space.
One point of that as we sort of think about this in time, some students are earlier in their education and have more time to recover.
Mm-hmm.
Others that are in high school, don't have as much time to recover, and then you start thinking of the community colleges. One aspect of this that I don't want to see happen is that this problem goes away just because the people leave the system. There's one possibility where these pre-K and kindergarten students come into the system and you see increasing rates of proficiency, not because we sort of catch kids up, but just because the ones that were impacted leave the system. Mm-hmm. And that's a very real possibility that if things go back to the status quo, we just see this sort of group that leaves the system lower than any that we've seen in a generation.
Any other questions, thoughts?
Sherry, you did a great job. This was really well put together and very informative. You facilitated a great conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Flores and team. Thank you, Dr. Betta-Benner, for coming to Indiana and being a partner. We sure appreciate it. And I know a lot of work ahead, and we'll continue to work with you to progress monitor and support our students. So thank you. On that note, our final discussion item for the day is the dashboard. We knew that the iLearn data would be a long conversation. The dashboard is a incredibly important discussion for the board to have, and it will probably also be helpful if we're fresh to have that. So what we have done is Ron is going to share some high-level information. We're going to consider this a level set, a kickoff, and then we'll also work with you as board members prior to our August meeting to do some additional level setting so that really in August we can have a more robust conversation when we're fresh and our coffee is full, because this is a critical and very exciting work we have ahead with creating a dashboard. So Ron?
Absolutely, thank you. And if I could real quick, I would be remiss if I didn't make a connection between the point that Mr. Watts made and the response that Mr. Better made about the dashboard, which is some of this acceleration is new, but many of it is not. Much of it is not. And the difference is we have an unprecedented amount of funding. And so we should not expect teachers to walk into classrooms that are structured similarly to the classrooms that they walked into prior to the pandemic. It's not going to work. Our teachers have put heroic efforts into the past 18 months and even prior to that. And we have to start thinking about how do we structure the system to reflect the dynamic needs of students, as opposed to relying on the teacher to overcome a system that treats all students the same. And so we have the money to do that in a meaningful way. To talk about Ms. Moat's example of parallel enrollment, right, of those types of things. We have to get to that level of systemic change, and we hope that this initial conversation about a dashboard will contribute to that. Because this conversation is a shift a little bit about how we think about school performance. And this is just the initial conversation, and it's meant to give you a heads up. And then we will then, over the next several months, talk about the details and dig into the nitty-gritty. So the impetus or the catalyst for this particular conversation is a recent bill that was passed in 2021, HEA 1514. It was a comprehensive education bill that, among other things, requires the State Board of Education to revisit accountability and how the board thinks about and reports out on school performance. Specifically, it requires the Department of Education, and this is new, to recommend to the board and ultimately the board to approve a state performance dashboard that includes a compilation of longitudinal data points. And so as you may remember or recall, the state has historically really focused on a single summative rating, and that was a policy position that the state took, and that's still in the law, but we're really encouraging a more dynamic representation of school performance and transparency about performance. And it's so critical, we believe, at this time, because that is how we're going to inform the recovery. That is how we're going to be able to send signals, and this board will have the opportunity to approve that final dashboard so that we are sending the right information out, we're sending the right signals to be able to inform not only this initial acceleration, but then even beyond recovery and well into the future. It also encourages local school corporations, it doesn't require it, but it does authorize it, to develop local indicators, and for the department to develop the capacity for them to include those indicators on their local website to complement the state board approved dashboard. Again, recognizing that accountability and school performance is not always one size fits all, and that local schools and local communities value certain things within their schools that might not be valued everywhere else in the state. And finally, one of the new things is it authorizes the board, it does not require, but authorizes the board to publish individual indicator summative ratings. So currently we just report out proficiency, we report out growth. We don't have summative ratings for each individual indicator, so it's something that the board, and we will work with the board to consider the implications of. And so as I mentioned, the initial conversation And so the timeline that we are working under is backwards design as a former educator, hoping that by the winter of 2022, we have a proposed dashboard for your consideration. And between now and then, we will be building off the accountability framework that we developed. The stakeholder input we got through that process will inform these dashboard conversations. We will come alongside you to make sure that you're brought along, and the proposal that you receive in the winter is something that you felt you had a chance to understand and influence along the way. And then that will then initiate really important next steps so that we can develop and publish the dashboard and start to really transition conversations around school performance from individual summative letter grades, which again I think the state has determined are important, but also complement that with really specific, important, and actionable, critical, actionable performance data from the state. And with that, that's what I have, and you'll hear from us as a follow-up with the plan to propose that dashboard in the winter.
In addition to that, I want to thank you, Ron, for that presentation. In addition to that, I want to reemphasize between now and next meeting, so the August meeting, our goal would be to get with each of you to set up a time to talk through some of this, to talk through the opportunities ahead. I get that we have an aggressive timeline of winter to approve a dashboard. And so what that means is again, we'll have a lot of work to do between now and then. So please expect a time to be set up specifically with you. Okay, any additional questions, comments to Ron? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank you.